We can get started. I'm just gonna introduce Martha real quick, then I'm gonna unshare my screen and we'll keep this pretty casual, I think. I've just got questions for Martha. Just, again, didn't want to have it too formal, wanted it to be casual. As always, Joan and I would invite you guys to stop at any time and ask questions of Martha as we're going through this. But Martha, I specifically wanted Martha on for this. Out of any agent I know, I think that Martha is the one who takes her job as a fiduciary and knows her role as a fiduciary to our clients, especially buyer clients, the best. Yeah, she's been at this for a long time, since the early 2000s, I think. Working behind the scenes for Maureen. And also I specifically wanted Martha just to speak to like knowing the ins and outs of the behind the scenes work and like how you can speak to your value just from that contract to close process and how many details are within that process itself. That you can speak to at a buyer consultation too, as newer agents, like don't forget those small details that matter. So yeah, I'm going to stop the share, then I'm going to have Martha kind of go through her bio a little bit more as well. 1 second here.
Steph, do you want to do this according to the questions that you sent me?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I can pull them up and I can read them off.
Okay.
Let me get, here we go. That's what I wanted to do. And then Joan, of course, pipe in at any time, as you would. You wouldn't be shy to anyway. Let's see here. Now I just need to pull up my. Well, first, let's start off. So Martha spoke last week. She was part of a panel at our event at the War Memorial with Tommy Choi, and Charlie ran a small panel with Rick and Tommy and Martha, Rick Rubin, excuse me, to speak to our value and better hone in on our skills in the upcoming market. But one thing that Martha commented on then was, only just getting into sales just at the inception of KW. So do you want to speak to that more, Martha?
Sure.
What you were doing?
Yeah. Okay. So I started in real estate back in 1998. Had 3 kids at that time, and Julia was the youngest, and she was 6 months old. So I started working as an admin for Maureen Stale. She's my sister. And at the time she was working for Katie Falk. And so I just asked her, if there was an opportunity for me to work with them and just do some admin things for them, not knowing anything about real estate outside of buying a house. We already owned a house at that point. So anyway, my job back then was managing Katie and Maureen's buyer lists, and that was my main focus. So I would schedule showings and do all the follow-up, et cetera, et cetera. I took on more responsibilities as time went on, and then Maureen asked if I felt confident enough to go on our own together as a team. And back in those days, teams were really not a thing. Maybe you would have a little staff, but nothing was really promoted as a real estate team back in those days. So, she was the front of the shop. I was the back of the shop for 15 years. I handled everything for her outside of negotiating contracts, listing properties, and showing buyers. I did everything else, you name it, and pretty much learned as I went. I had some key people help me along the way, but I'm pretty intuitive and picked it up relatively quickly. Maureen and I grew our little team, and she was #1 in MLS for a long time. And she felt it was really necessary for her and myself for our growth to look into another opportunity. And that's when Keller Williams was in her focus. So then as soon as we joined Keller Williams, along with just a couple of other key people, she said, okay, you're going to stay in admin, but I want you to start studying to get your license. And I thought, oh man. And she said, the only way you're going to grow is if you move into sales. And so she just really encouraged me. And I knew a lot more than, just a newly licensed agent, because I did all of the admin and support work for her for so many years and knew the contracts so well. And she just said, okay, it's time to jump off the ledge. And I didn't feel I had the confidence to handle sales at that point. And she said, yes, you do. Here you go. So I am, eternally grateful to her for always encouraging me and giving me the support that I needed and the faith and trust. So here I am. Then we continued to build our team and bring on admin staff. And, then they slowly took over that role from me. And then I just kind of led into sales. So I guess, and having said all of that, the benefit for me is that I knew so much about the process from the back of the shop. So it came much easier for me once I did get my license. But I mean, just getting your license, there's so much more to it. No one can teach hustle, right? In order to be successful in this business, you got to have the hustle, you have to have the relationships, and you have to have the right attitude and be able to, partner with your clients, both buyers and sellers, so that they feel like, you're in this together.
Right. Just for our new agents, like, what was your hesitancy, like, with your confidence building and like building those skills? I mean, were you hesitant about the actual negotiations? Were you, just, what? Yeah. Okay.
I was nervous about where am I going to get clients from?
Okay.
How does that go? Because that part of the job I had never done.
Sure.
And really, I'm hosting an open house. Oh my God. Are people really going to trust me? I don't know. And so that's really how I started.
Okay.
I just hosted as many open houses as I possibly could. And, I think I just said, I'm just going to be really genuine when I'm meeting new clients and share my knowledge. And it came, pretty effortless. I don't want to sound like that, but I think that people really like a natural personality when they're speaking to somebody in a sales role, and someone who also comes with confidence, knows the market, knows the process. And I could speak to all of that really well.
Yeah. I'm glad that's actually not something I didn't mean for us to touch on. So I'm glad you brought it up with open houses and for our new agents to hear that. Cause I know that that's exactly how Jay Schmidt got started too. He just like made sure he was doing open houses for like the first 3 years of his business.
Absolutely.
So,
because the open houses turn into listings, right? We all know that.
Right.
And so I would say really that's what really catapulted my business. And then as the years have gone on, so what was that, 10 years ago, I have built a really nice referral business for myself and repeat business, people, moving up from their first time home buyer situation and moving up in the ranks, more kids, all of that.
Right.
And then they refer friends and family.
It's just building.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the buyer consultation process. Importance of a formal buyer consultation, and really like speak to like get into the weeds on this. Do you have a preference on where you meet your clients? When are you making sure you're having a consultation? Are you doing it over Zoom? I'm sure you're pretty fluid with it, as we all are. But yeah, speak to your buyer consultation process and, maybe how it's changed over, since you began and how it has evolved. Maybe there are points in there that, as you learned more and more about like the points that you wanted to touch on, like speak to that too.
Yep, sure. So there are, a lot of key things that don't change regardless of, the new forms that we're using. So your first question was, when and how do I perform my buyer consults? I like to do them over Zoom.
Awesome.
Everybody's busy. Sometimes if there's two buyers, a couple, their time is really precious if they have babies, all of that kind of stuff. It's just, and I think that generation too is all about efficiency, right? So I always do a Zoom. I always send my buyer agency agreement over ahead of time, so they have that.
Awesome.
I touch upon my experience, just like what I told you guys on the Zoom call. It's pretty much a script for me so that they understand my background, my experience, what our team is, who our team is, where we came from, and where we're going. And then I also talk about the process of home buying, if it's a first-time home buyer. And if it's not a first-time home buyer, I always say to them, this is what I do. This is not what you do. So everything might be a reminder, but you may have forgotten a lot about the process.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask that too, like making sure that you're still doing a buyer consultation for repeat buyers and that
Absolutely.
It's still...
Okay. Absolutely. Because I never liked, and I always tell them that I never like to assume that or that you remember, because there's a lot of details. And so then I'll go in and talk about the process and the MLS portal and how I notify buyers of new listings outside of just setting them up in the MLS.
Cool.
That a lazy agent just sets up a buyer on, autopilot. I don't do that. I have a list in front of me on my desk all the time of who the hot buyers are that I need to be watching for. And when I see something come up in the MLS, and I tell them all of this, you're going to see me hit you through an email, and you're also going to see me hit you with the MLS through a text. And if you don't know how to text an MLS link, it's real easy off the app, the Flex MLS app. And so that way I get their attention immediately, because often they'll just ignore those auto feeds. And they won't see the delayed listings that way. So that's also showing your value, that you're watching things that are upcoming. You're preparing the buyers for these new properties, and you're telling them all of that, of how you work. So be ready to go, be ready to rock. And then when we talk about buyer agency, I just sort of work into that. And I explain the form because it's super important. I also say, I speak to the commission aspect. Some agents ask their buyers to sign buyer agency at the consultation. That's not my style. It's a contract, as I tell them. And we're just dating. We're not married until we have an accepted offer, right? And I say, I would like to show you a handful of properties, whether that's on our first visit or maybe it's our second visit to homes, so that I can show you my value and my knowledge on properties, how I show you properties, and how I explain areas, values, all of that kind of thing. And I explain how far I can go without a buyer agency. And then I flip to, what is a buyer agency about?
Perfect.
And I explain to them, it allows me to negotiate for you, the buyer, because, otherwise I'm an agent of the seller in the state of Wisconsin. It also allows me to mention certain things about the location of a property. I can't give you my opinion on price, which is what you really want me to do. I can't do that without a buyer agency agreement. And I also, when a buyer commits to me, that's through a buyer agency. My commitment to you is to inform you of properties that might be coming up, or ones that I know of that are off market, single parties, all of that you're never going to get that opportunity through Zillow.
I think that's a good segue into speaking to part of like the relationship building, like outside of your relationship with your client. I mean, speak to your relationships with other agents in the marketplace in terms of
100%. And
yeah.
It's funny, I was just with a co-broke the other day at a property, because we have an FHA appraisal that we're trying to work through, he and I, and he's a great agent. I've never dealt with him before, but I think he's going to be my best friend. But, I think you have to go into these negotiations with a level head, always knowing that agent on the other side of the transaction, you may deal with them again at another time. So keep things cooperative and on the up and up, with always of the attitude of, we're going to get to the closing table. How can we put our heads together to make this happen? And that's exactly what Rob and I did the other day, because we had a problem on our hands. And he was all freaked out and panicked about it. And he's like, oh my God, the FHA appraiser is saying, oh, and I just said, okay, stop. What are the problems? And I said, Rob, we're getting to the closing table. Let's go over to the house. Let's talk about it. We're going to get this done. So, and he said, I love that attitude. You're right. We will get this done. So if you always just, it's not only giving your buyer the level of confidence, it's always telling the co-broke your level of confidence and cooperation.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So
boy,
anyway, you asked about, sorry,
I was just going to say that was a true role of being an agent, of being a fiduciary. That you're there for your client, and to maintain that relationship with the co-broke is just as important as maintaining your relationship with your client.
100%. Because they're going to make the process easy, or they're going to make it very difficult.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And that agent on the other side may be writing an offer on one of your listings. So you want to make sure that you keep things, have a good rapport between the two of you. And relationships, I can't stress this enough. Relationships are so important in this business. Your integrity and your reputation, right? And I do always bring this into a listing appointment, and I also bring it into a buyer agency consult. I always give the example of reputation and how that's important to me and how long I've been in the business. And then I say, I'll tell you something. When a listing agent is sitting there and they've got 5 offers sitting in front of them, many of us, what's the first thing we look at before we even look at price or any details of the offer? We look at who's the agent that wrote the offer. And then I explain to the seller what kind of negotiations we will have until the closing table. If we're going to have problems, any of that kind of a thing. I mean, it's super important to maintain integrity.
awesome. Mary Beth Milkey had a question. So at what point are you traditionally, when are you asking the buyers to sign the buyer agency?
Good question. So we talk about the buyer agency agreement at our consultation. And I just had one the other day, and I said to her, Grace, I'm not going to ask you to sign this today. I'm just talking with you about it and preparing you for that. And I tell her, I'm not going to ask you to sign it today because you and I just met. You don't understand my value until we really go and look at a property, and then you'll understand. And that's when I remind them of the purpose of a buyer agency agreement when we're together, because they might ask me a question at the property and I have to say, you know what, without a buyer agency agreement, I can't give you my opinion on this price. I can't say anything that's not supporting the best interest of the seller. And then they always sign.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, it doesn't make sense for me not to sign.
Like completely natural after you demonstrate that.
But it's always usually after the first showing or first tour, whichever comes first.
And then I don't know if you need to get into the weeds on this, but I mean, obviously, has your buyer consultation had needed to change, right? Between, maybe 5 years ago to now.
Yes, my buyer consultation has changed. One of your questions on the list was, how has the buyer agency consultation gone since it's been a seller's market for so long? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll dive into, okay, guys, guess what? I am going to be brutally honest with you. You might lose 3 houses before you're going to win. And it's not because of my inability to negotiate for you. It's because you just don't understand the process. And when I say you might have to write without an inspection, that's not what I'm recommending. The way that I say it is, I'm just going to be honest with you. You're probably going to be competing with cash buyers, and you're going to be competing with buyers that are writing with no inspection. I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm preparing you.
Sure.
And they say, well, what's the workaround? How can I get the best of both? And that's when I start talking about addendum AC.
Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, let's talk about commission then. Explaining how we're paid, traditionally, obviously, we're paid by the seller. Do you go into that? I mean, is that something that you've already gone into prior to the recent climate or recent litigation? Have you had to try and negotiate commission with the FSBO? Have you ever had a buyer pay you directly when it comes to a FSBO situation?
Okay, so there's a lot there. I would say, okay. One thing that I say is they say, well, who wouldn't sign a buyer agency agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
I say, in my experience, because I work with 3 investors, the only ones that don't sign buyer agency agreements are investors for the most part, because they make them property specific. Okay. And I said, but that's a whole different can of worms. Just a regular buyer out there is going to sign buyer agency because they want to know about upcoming listings. Okay. So let's get back to what you're asking. And what am I saying about commission? So when they're a first time home buyer, they don't realize who's paying commission for the most part.
Sure.
I say one thing that they might say to me, what's a question that I should be asking you and I've not covered yet? And I'll say, it's commission. How am I getting paid? And they say, oh yeah. And I'll say, the commission comes out of the seller's commission. They're paying my 2.4%. And to them, they think, wow, that's really a win. But I also make sure that I cover, okay, in this line in the buyer agency agreement, if we find a for sale by owner, this is not a FSBO market, but in the event that we do, that commission, I always ask the seller ahead of time and try to get the seller to agree to paying my commission. But if they don't, you and I might have to have a conversation.
Sure.
Have I ever been unsuccessful in getting a seller to pay my commission? One time was super challenging, but I got it done. And they also didn't have an attorney. Oh, they had an attorney working on their side, but she didn't understand the process at all. It was terrible. I would never recommend writing on a FSBO. It's the worst. Because you're doing both sides.
You end up doing both sides, right? Have you ever had to, has a buyer ever had to pay you directly?
Nope, I've never had that.
Okay.
Nope. I really try to avoid those FSBOs for a whole host of reasons. Yeah. Sure. I always worry about disclosure. I always worry about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Another question from Mary Beth. Yeah, I don't know if you've implemented this into your practice. Do you charge a fee on top of like the traditional 2.4% that we're collecting from the seller, obviously? Do you charge a buyer agency commission fee? I do not. I know that there are agents out there that do. It's just not my practice. Yeah. Okay. I don't have a real good reason as to why, that's a value add, I guess. But I do bring it up. I say there are some agents out there that will charge $5.95 to run buyers around. And I say, that's not my practice, because I feel pretty confident that, we're going to get this job done fairly quickly. Yeah. Cool. Leah has a question. So what are you doing on showings that proves your value and encourages them to sign? So I think you've covered most of this already, but just like, if you want to repeat, just demonstrating where you have to stop short when you're working as a sales agent. Yep. If we don't have a buyer agency agreement in place, I'll just speak in very general terms. I'll say what's close by. This is walking distance. Let's just say it's a Whitefish Bay property and they're not from the area. I'll say, you always have to keep resale in mind when you're buying a property, right? Mm-hmm. You may not have kids, but your next buyer will probably. So being in close proximity to a school is important. I can provide them with sales data, but I can't interpret it for them. Right. I might say, I'm just more or less delivering the facts. Here's their list of improvements and updates. I can't say anything about how well those updates have been done and what my opinion of that is, unless I have buyer agency. It's simply, I guess that's the best answer I can give you. Present the facts that are in front of you in the MLS data sheet,
list of updates, and the condition report. That's about it.
Awesome.
Because you want them to go to the next level. You want them to be like, oh, shoot. And if they ask me something about the basement, I can say, I can only present what's here in the condition report. I cannot offer my opinion on what I see. And then that really gets them
Right.
going on that.
Nada. So I'm just looking at the chat here, Martha.
Yeah.
I'm confused by the dialogue with seller paying the buyer commission. I thought the addendum CL says sellers don't have to pay. So that is not, so Nada, that is not what the addendum CL says. We're just outlining the addendum C and the addendum CL and CBA are, the main points of that are to communicate that our commission is not fixed. And the current model is that the buyer's commission comes from the seller, right? Out of that total commission that the seller is being charged. And we're, we're hoping, and it might be very true that the model will not change at all, and we're hoping it doesn't. And through our practices, it hopefully will not change. But I think what we're trying to do is get ahead of these conversations, and as buyer's agents, making sure that it's more like understandable what service we are providing in the event we have to charge a commission to our buyer, right? So that's.
Yeah. And I would like to add, I think the only thing that's going to change in our dialogue with our clients, or about to be clients, is just making sure that we get across, and this is the aim of the addendum C and now part of the contracts, that negotiations are necessary with commission. There's no set commission. There's no standard commission. It's not my broker tells me I have to get this commission. All commissions are negotiable, and your clients should be made aware of that. And that's the reason this, the result from the lawsuit is there were some people who sued saying they weren't aware of the flexibility of a commission, and they did what they were told, but they realized they could have negotiated. That's the only thing that's changing, is we just have to make sure that we are more open and negotiable.
Yeah. And which has always been the case. We just weren't highlighting it. This is the best way that we could have been.
I think that's where, a lot of this too is some agents not knowing how to present buyer agency, or explaining the process and skipping over commission altogether, even on a listing. And then all of a sudden the closing statement comes out and everything's a surprise.
Right.
It's costing me how much? You didn't tell me about title insurance. You didn't tell me about all these fees.
Right.
So, that's a whole nother conversation. But, when you go on a listing, just, bring along that worksheet that shows commission is going to cost you this much. Title is going to cost you this much, approximately. Proration is this, da, 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 so that they're prepared when they see that closing statement, how much is coming out of their pocket.
Yeah. The power of the net proceeds sheet.
Oh, yeah.
It's so valuable. Nada, does this help? And you guys feel free to unmute yourselves too.
That was really helpful. And not that I stumble over the idea of it. I think where some of this is truly hypothetical, where if someone, let's just say we start seeing on MLS that buyer agency is 1.2, because maybe the seller says, well, I'll pay half of the buyer's commission, but not the full thing. As when we start seeing that, then in my mind, okay, it opens up another can of worms. Like, well, if they don't have the money, how do you keep things together? Do you just succumb and take the 1.2%? Like, it's just a whole other list of things that may or may not happen.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I mean, there are areas in the country, there are areas even in the state of Wisconsin, where the compensation is definitely split. The buyer pays buyer agent and the seller pays the listing agent. And there's parts in the East Coast where that has been going on for a long time. And that's just the way it's done. They do not compensate, cooperate. And it could turn to that, but I think what we're seeing where some buyer agents are charging their own fee, it is dipping into that a little bit. And that's where, as Martha's doing so well, is explaining her value. You have to be able to prove your value in order to maintain your commission and what your negotiating power is. And that's why Martha's message today is really important, because we always have to keep in mind what our value is.
And you know, I've really thought about how I'm going to present that commission being negotiable on a buyer side, right? And I mean, it's my understanding that this form isn't saying that we can't say what we charge personally.
Right.
It can't be a fixed commission. One thing that I am doing when I'm looking at the hot sheet is I'm looking to see what everybody's got their commissions at, to see if any of that is adjusting yet. And I've not seen that in the areas where I work yet, really, unless it's a, you know, luxury listing, and sometimes you'll see that at a 2%. But, you know, I just honestly will tell you that I am gonna hold pretty firm to that 2.4%. I work too hard. And I mean, I don't want to sound a particular way, but I work too hard. I've got way too much experience and way too much value to add. And it won't be that I'm going to, you know, dig my heels in, but I just really want a buyer to understand, you know, if you're working with me, you're going to get like the most incredible service. And what kinds of service do I offer? Okay, well, in that example that I just gave you with Rob, the co-broke, I was scraping paint over there on Saturday with him.
Right.
Because we needed to get this paint situation figured out at this property. Inspections, I mean, talk about relationship stuff. You know this, that you have to have a posse of contractors that will jump when you call them, when you need them to come in on inspection items. Those relationships are equally as important as your co-brokes, right? All of these people are coming together to get you to the closing table. So those are all things that I'm going to be using in that conversation. And if somebody's offering a 1.8%, my buyer is going to be prepared for that gap, because I'm not going to be, you know, writing 5 offers and spending 6 months with the buyer, and then all of a sudden there's a 1.8 commission offered.
Awesome. Exactly. And there are, you know, we don't have to, if we come to this too, I mean, there are going to be ways that we can negotiate that with the seller too. I mean, those can be, that gap can be made up in the seller credit. Again, hopefully we don't even have to come to this, right? But there will be ways that we can adjust and help the buyer pay for that gap, for sure.
So I think the most important thing is just having a list of what value you bring. You know, not only are you bringing the education to your buyer on the process, the relationships that I said, your negotiating skills, helping them navigate their search, doing the CMAs and spending time in, you know, analyzing those and explaining, offer writing and negotiations, how many times we're writing offers on how many properties, getting through inspections, which are very tricky, and also appraisals. But if I can just say one thing to all of you guys that might be new, don't watch the news. Don't get caught up in everything about this, all these lawsuits and all that stuff. There's always going to be some excuse for why we can't get our job done to the best of our ability, right? Whether it's high interest rates, whether it's low inventory, whether it's COVID, whether it's this lawsuit and commissions up for debate, whatever. There are still buyers, there are still sellers. Every single day, just get your job done. Don't give up.
Yeah.
Perfect. I had people over for dinner Saturday night, and that it just came up out of the blue. So does this mean that real estate agents are going to be paid less now? I went,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
maybe the opposite. Because
This is kind of, I agree. I so agree. So I'm sure a lot of people listen to Mel Robbins, but she brought up this topic the other day, and I forget what the show is about, but she said, I don't watch the news. She said, I don't even read the newspaper. But if I'm at a cocktail party, like what you're saying, Joni, and somebody brings up something that, wow, I better really be paying attention to that, I'll jump in and I'll read up on it just so that I'm aware that, something's happening. But she said, otherwise, you focus on all of that and it does nothing but bring you down and demotivate you.
Right.
And give you excuses.
Another comment I wanted to make too is just there's fixed commission and there's standards of commission, and just making sure that we are not confusing that. Like we can't, is no set commission, but you as an agent and us as a brokerage have our standards of commission that we're going to adhere to. And that has not changed and will not change. So I just want to make sure that that's communicated as well. All right, well, we still have 25 minutes, and especially for our new agents, and again, why I just love you so much, Martha, you're speaking to your process with the inspection contingency. Like, I think just going over the details of that is worth its weight in gold in terms of like what a client does not know about the inspection process, right? And the things that you are going to think of for them as a buyer's agent that you would not be able to do as a seller's agent. Yeah, just speak to your inspection process more. And, again, kind of those details that the buyer might not think to even know to ask.
Okay.
Right.
So before we get there, I just want to emphasize, and Tommy Choi brought this up the other day, you never want to represent both sides of the contract. Of a
Yes.
deal. Never, ever, ever, ever. I can't emphasize that more. So getting to your question about inspections, what more of a value do I bring? Okay. There are some agents out there that will do the home inspection, say to their seller, okay, let's pick out the defects in the inspection report. Let's draft up an amendment saying seller at seller's expense to hire a licensed electrician to fix A, B, C, and D. And, throw all of these things into an amendment without really going further and getting estimates. So we know, are we talking about a mouse or an elephant, or what kind of dollar amounts are we talking about? Or how can we avoid underwriting? All of those things. So you're explaining all of that to your buyer. You never want to hit the panic button at an inspection. Number one, when you're at an inspection, keep your mouth shut. The inspection is between the inspector and the buyer. The buyer will ask the inspector the questions. You take notes. And sometimes I'll do this if it's a first-time home buyer. I'll say to Mark Henry, who is my favorite inspector, I'll say, hey, Mark, these guys are first-time home buyers. Can you just give them an overview of the purpose of the home inspection, what you're doing for them today, and just be open to a lot of questions and maybe some questions that they should be asking and they're not. And he always takes it from there. Because we all know the purpose of a home inspection is to identify defects and safety items. Okay. So we get through the inspection. Buyer might be a little freaked out about a few things. I'll always put them at ease by saying, hey, listen, everything can be fixed. It's just a matter of what it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it. So let's go through the list. I've got a list of contractors that will come in here and give me prices for all of these things. I talk about what right to cure means and what the seller's rights are with that right to cure. And that's a whole nother conversation. So I'm not looking to get cheap estimates, and I'm also not bringing in the most expensive contractors that will blow the deal up.
Sure.
I'm bringing in ones that have a reputation amongst the industry. So the agents on the other side know that I'm bringing a valid proposal to the table. Okay. So typically I'll do like a 12-day inspection window, but I'll always tell a buyer, I get that home inspector in there like the next day if I can, because I want to give enough time to bring in further inspections if that's necessary.
Yep.
And then you lay out all of your proposals and you say to the buyer, there's a lot of stuff here. If it's a, you know, a property with a lot of defects, and you just say, let's prioritize. Because the worst thing you can do is send over an amendment that has 12 things listed. Because what does the seller immediately do? They get defensive, and then things start to go south. Just pick out the things that are the most important to you and focus on that.
Awesome. I also just like the goal too of getting estimates, and for the purposes of negotiation, but also for like having the buyer have an understanding going into their home eyes wide open, because it might be the case where if, you know, if there's 2 or 3 secondary offers waiting in the wings, you know, they might have to eat that money and eat those repairs and move forward if they want to continue on with the house. But at least they, you know, there won't be any questions about the condition and what they're getting into, right?
Right.
So you as an agent too can have peace of mind in that post-closing period that nothing's going to come up that they didn't know about, that you helped them get as much knowledge about the issues as you could.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. And I also say in front of the inspector, hey, listen, they're also your partner in this. Even after the transaction's closed, you can certainly call them if you've got questions about, hey, what did you say I'm supposed to be doing about, you know, furnace filter or any of those kinds of things? Because, you know, you want at least one of the buyers there, and you explain to them, you know, of course, the purpose of a home inspection is to identify all of these things per the contract, but also it is your way to learn about the house. Turning off spigots in the wintertime. Where's the shutoff valves in the basement? How often should I be changing the furnace filter? You know, other little intricacies about a house that an inspector is going to share with the buyer. Super important.
Let's get to the chat, see if we've got any more. Bethany, I'd love to get more ideas on how to have dialogue with people that bring this up. Bethany, do you want to unmute? Do you mean covering the gap?
Yes, the gap.
Okay.
Just because especially first-time home buyers don't necessarily have money and it can't be rolled into the mortgage as of yet.
As of yet. Well, I think, you know, again, we kind of commented, you know, seller credit might be an option for us. I mean, it is an option for us to cover buyer agency commissions. You know, that's kind of the only one I've got right now.
Yeah. And then the other thing is like I even had this weekend, just like Martha or Joan, whoever said that, you know, it's that time of year, people are getting together at cocktails and they find out you're a realtor and they're like, oh, so, you know, what's going to happen? Are you going to be working for free? Like, you know, what's happening with this lawsuit I just heard about? You know, just like, what are people saying?
What are people saying? I think I just always, I don't know. What are people saying?
I don't
It's
even
been brought up to my attention. It's just more like, you know, honestly, in my opinion, it's agents that aren't going through the contracts fully and explaining commission, to be honest with you, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to do my job for free, because I'm not. Every agent is different on what commission they're going to be charging, you know, just like any other profession. There's not, you know, a straight pay grade for everything, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One very sassy response is to say, well, you get what you pay for. And
Yeah.
I kind of did do that just to like cut it off, because it's like, first of all, this is all in the beginning stages. Things are going, you know, this is like so far down the road, really, before this maybe will affect us. But I mean, literally, you will get what you pay for. Either you want to be represented or not. No one's keeping you from doing this by yourself.
Yeah. And, you know, then it comes up, you know, honestly, in my opinion, if a buyer's not willing to pay my commission, I don't want to work with that buyer. You know, that's 5 other people I could be focusing on instead of running around to properties for 1.8%
Mm-hmm.
and writing 6 offers in competition.
One thing that came out of the panel last week, Thursday too, was just, our communication as listing agents to our sellers. And, we're going to be isolating a whole pool of people. If it comes up from the seller's perspective that they don't want to pay a buyer's commission, right? So it's, going to be on us as listing agents to make the seller understand why we want to keep this model and why this model has always worked, how we want that commission to come out of your proceeds, right? It just opens up a whole nother pool of people that you might not have had or might isolate because they can't pay a buyer's agent to help them. So that's going to be worked into those conversations too.
Yeah, I did bring that up because, and try to explain to the seller that if you have an unrepresented or a person that doesn't have a motivated buyer's agent and we run into inspection issues, the deal could be blown and you're starting at square one again. So what's that worth to you?
Right.
Yep. Yep. And I think on the listing side, explaining paying the 2.4% to a buyer's agent, on these data sheets, in the past, we've just, I don't know about you guys, but I've always just shared the public side of the data sheets with buyers so they don't see all that stuff. But I'm not doing that anymore, obviously, because I want the buyers to see what the commission is being paid to a buyer's agent. And, truthfully, for a buyer that can't afford to make up the difference, they want to know what that listing is paying the buyer's agent, right? And like you said, Steph, you're eliminating a whole group of people if you're not, being consistent with what's in the marketplace and what agents are used to being paid.
Yeah, I like Rick Rubin's point last week about just actually like showing sellers like, okay, this is what other sellers are paying in this market. Do you want, it's your prerogative. You can sway from that, but I don't advise it, right? So yeah, it's just going to be demonstrating more and more. Leah has a question. What have you heard people say as to why they chose you over another agent? Have you ever gotten that feedback, Martha? And have you ever had to decline working with somebody?
Yeah. Feedback of how people have responded to working with me, like what their feedback is on that.
Well, why they might have chosen you over another agent, like if you were being interviewed.
Okay. Like what they've said to me, oh, we talked to 5 agents and we're going with you because.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yep. Because I like your buyer presentation. I like how you're straightforward. I like that you're from the area. So you have experience raising kids here and you have great knowledge of the schools. I'm just giving examples.
Sure.
The school system. And also I have a friend that worked with you maybe, or I like that you're organized and I like your system.
Awesome.
And I like that, we're not supposed to be working all the time, but I always say you will find that I do respond very quickly.
Yep.
So, and I said, please forgive me if there's a lot of texting that goes on, but just know I'm trying to get your attention quickly if there's a new listing. And then that typically turns into following up with a phone call.
Love it. Yeah, Martha, you guys, she's a straight shooter, 100%. So, and that's appreciative. That's authentic, right?
So everybody, I've known Steph my entire career, right? Would you say that?
Yeah. I don't know if we commented on that, but yeah. So Martha's the one that brought me to KW. So a lot of love here.
We worked together at Shore West, and Steph's job back then was answering the phones, you guys, and that was before showing time.
Yes.
You'd have to call so you're taking out a buyer, you're showing 10 properties. You have to call every single brokerage, make a call to them. And sometimes if there are 3 listings with 1 brokerage, Steph, I have 3 properties I want to show. Could I put you on hold for 1 second? Right?
It's a nightmare. So, thank God for showing time.
I know. So anyway, we've worked very closely. So she and I understand each other.
Nada has another question. Go ahead and unmute, Nada.
Thank you. Martha, do you do your buyer consultation primarily verbal? Do you send them like PowerPoint deck-ish kind of a presentation ahead of time and you guys walk through that together? If you can kind of illustrate to us how you approach that.
So we have our buyer consultation in our Google Docs. I'll send that ahead of time. What I focus on in that booklet when I'm on a Zoom is the flow chart of the process, right? That's a great tool because you know what, they're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be overwhelmed about going through the entire book and here's my history and here's my admin staff and you're going to hear from this person, that person, the other thing. No. Don't get caught up in any of that because they're never going to remember. All they want to know is the here and now and give me the cliff notes, right? I'll also send them a blank buyer agency agreement. I will also send them this article that I have on the purpose of a home inspection. So they can read through that versus them showing up at their home inspection when we get to that point and guns ablaze and thinking that they're going to ask the seller to fix everything because they competed for it and they're paying handsomely, right? That keeps their expectations under control.
Awesome.
Are you willing to share some of that with us?
Sure.
Yeah, I can get a copy of
I'll
Martha's.
send you our flow chart. I mean, the whole booklet that we have is pretty straightforward and everybody should have one of those anyways. But the flow chart and that article about what to expect from a home inspection, I'd be glad to send over.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I would love to speak to that more too. I think that's the best thing that came out of COVID is just this adoption of doing your buyer consultation over Zoom. I think it's a game changer.
Yeah.
You know,
because before, I mean, you sometimes would have a phone conversation. There's more emotion in the Zoom call versus a phone call, right?
Yeah.
Face with the name, and I get it. And it takes away a lot of the conversation when you're at the first property that you're showing. Because I found in the past, I'm doing my whole buyer consultation at that first showing.
Right.
And we're wasting time.
Right. And you can share your screen and bring up that flow chart. I mean, it's just such a time saver. It's great.
Yep.
Yeah,
and then
I would
about
most of our
sales.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the other thing I bring up, because they're going to want to know, how many closings do I do a year? What are my sales? So I speak to all of that too. So they know that I really actually produce.
Joni, what were you going to say?
I was just saying one of the great values that you're providing with the buyer consultation and with the listing presentation as well is eliminating all those problems and surprises near the end of a transaction. I would say most of the calls that Steph and I get with situations that have turned kind of ugly are a result of not preparing the buyer, the client, or the seller, the client, for these situations. We've seen them come up over and over. It's good to have those in your presentation to say, this is why we need this, because this may happen or whatever.
Right.
That's the buyer consultation is so critical.
Yeah, it is. One other thing that I'm forgetting to mention is I talk about a property condition report. I tell them ahead of time, these are the things that we'll expect to see in the MLS before we even look at a property. If there's something that you're interested in, I'll pull up the documents and send them to you even before we unlock the door. And then I'll say, hey, listen, don't be worried if somebody checks yes. The default is no on the check, on the list. If they mark yes, always look for the explanation because it could have been an old problem that they fixed. So I just sort of educate them on what is the purpose of a condition report, what's alarming, what's not alarming.
Great.
Awesome. I think some comments that Joni made makes me want to nail this point home too. Just like, kind of going above and beyond with the listing agent as a buyer's agent in terms of those final weeks before closing, or that final week before closing. I know that Martha makes it a part of her process to get in touch with the listing agent and say, just as a reminder, this is the condition that the property needs to be in, right? We remind our sellers, but we're also reminding that listing agent to remind the seller, of what the condition the house needs to be in at closing to help save those problems
Oh my gosh.
at the final walkthrough. So, it's just like those small details, it's stuff that we think is insignificant, but it just, kind of, again, making those proactive steps and communicating with everybody in those final couple weeks just
Yeah.
saves a lot of problems. And that's a service
Thanks.
that we're
Two
doing.
things about that stuff.
Mhm.
Always ask your buyer when you're doing that final walkthrough or even at the inspection, do you want the paint cans? And do you want the leftover building products, the old doors and whatever? Otherwise, sellers should be getting rid of all that stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Just make that part of your practice and inspection so that they can look at the things you're talking about versus, I don't know what was left there. I mean, because sometimes carpentry things like trim and things like that are very, very expensive. And if you're looking at doing any remodeling to the house, you're going to want those extra things, extra tile, extra carpet so you can match it.
Right.
Unless you're going in and you're changing everything, then you don't want all their old stuff.
Okay. So any other questions before we close out? Martha, thank you so much.